Friends, I am extremely happy to address you this evening, but I am sorry it's rather indirect through a video recording because I have to be in Hyderabad today. Let me start by warmly and heartily congratulating the International Collective in Support of Fisher Workers Trust and KILA, and also FAO. I've been associated with Panchayat Raj for a very, very long time at all levels, from the state to national levels, and I think this is the first time there is a national workshop focusing exclusively on fish workers and small-scale fisheries. In that sense, this is a path-breaking workshop, and my request at the outset is it shouldn't end with this should be the beginning. I personally feel, having worked as Secretary Panchayat Raj in Delhi, UN agencies like the FAO have a big role in reaching out to local governments to clarify their roles in respect of international goals. And here, it's a perfect fit for Panchayat Raj. Small-scale fisheries, unfortunately, has not got the attention it deserves. It provides food and nutrition security. I recall the famous study by Dr. K.N. Raj in the mid-70s when Kerala was one of the poorest states in India, but the quality of life was not that bad because they were supported by a good diet of fish and tapioca. So their health didn't deteriorate, even though there was a lot of poverty in Kerala at that point of time. This is applicable to the whole country. Secondly, livelihood security, which is a national priority now. And to the poorest of the poor, this fish farming or small-scale fisheries certainly provides the livelihoods. And it has got a strong ecological dimension and also a gender dimension because it really benefits the poor among women. And by definition, helping improve small-scale fisheries, it reduces poverty of one of the most vulnerable groups in the country. We have been focusing on SC and ST, rightly so, as the most vulnerable groups with special programs targeted at this group. I feel the fisher folk, especially the traditional fisher folk, need to be focused on with this kind of precise approach. And this being the 150th anniversary of Mahatma Ji's birth, is worth recalling his advice to us that Swaraj is nothing but eradication of poverty. So in a sense, we can relate it to the Gandhian principles. The small-scale fisheries guidelines evolved by FAO through consensus. Of course, it represents international consensus. Maybe it's not legally binding, but since it has got the support of all the nations, it is morally binding, and all these consensus documents have to be rather general in their prescriptions. So it's our duty to detail them, make them operational in accordance with the spirit of the principles laid down by them. As I mentioned above, fisheries is one of the subjects which can be devolved to the panchayats under the 73rd Amendment. And the principles laid down by the SSF Guidelines, participatory approach, integrated approach, transparency and accountability, social responsibility, all this can be done best by Gram Panchayats because it's natural to their way of functioning. But it doesn't happen automatically. We need to work very carefully and in detail to ensure that it gets. Speaking of the role of panchayats, it must be borne in mind that in India, across states, there's a huge variation in functions, powers, and resources of panchayats. Therefore, we cannot have a pan-India solution or a pan-India program through panchayats. It has to be contextualized and extremely local. all said and done, decentralization of powers is political. It's very difficult for us, a small group, to influence political policy. But when you analyze the powers already conferred on panchayats through laws, government orders and circulars, they are substantial. But these powers have not been clarified in an operational sense to the panchayats, especially gram panchayats. So I would advocate to start with, as is, where is Panchayat Raj? Let us study the Panchayat Raj situation in each state, find out what powers have already gone and how they can be utilized in the current context, particularly in respect of small-scale fisheries. And another important thing, which we often forget, most of the powers of panchayats are traditional, historically coming down. They are not defined in law. It depends on their relationship with the citizens. So that power is very, very important, especially when you're dealing with a socio-economic group like poor fisherfolk. And panchayats can do a lot of what we in Delhi called low cost or no cost development, just by bringing together and converging services, resources, and also reaching out to the people. But I must add, there are a lot of new opportunities which have come in the last 10-15 years. The biggest opportunity is the huge grant which the 14th Finance Commission devolved to the Gram Panchayats, and the consensual decision by all states to go for a Gram Panchayat development plan, generically called GPDP. We hope the 15th Finance Commission, which is expected to give its report by the end of this month, also continues to provide handsome grants to the panchayats. So 2 lakh crore over the last 5 years, huge resources, and we can expect a similar amount in the next 5 years. Then the Ministry of Rural Development has taken a very important policy decision to make Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which is about 60,000 crore a year, as a part of the GPDP. So that can bring in a lot of livelihoods for the fisher people. And another important policy decision of Government of India in respect of the livelihoods mission, which has not been discussed in great detail, is that they are advocating after a long time that the SHGs of the poor should work with the Gram Panchayats. And since the fisherfolk live as a community in neighborhoods, it's easy to have SHGs of poor fisherfolk, women, poor fisher women, so that they can influence the Gram Panchayat. And there is a component, informal component of the livelihood mission called Mahila Kisan Sashактikaran Pariyojana, MKSP. There have been very few fisheries projects under that. So expert organizations should aim at developing viable fisheries projects to be implemented under the MKSP component of the livelihood mission. The Government of India has again come out with a generic program, what's called Mission Antyodaya. They want to make 50,000 Gram Panchayats, that is 1/5 of the Gram Panchayats, poverty free. It's a convergence program. And Swachh Bharat will now enter the new phase of solid and liquid waste management. Again, the fisherfolk deserve attention on that. And the newly launched Jal Shakti, which focuses on water supply, piped water supply, again, Gram Panchayats will have definitely a role, at least in their planning and operation and maintenance. So there again, they can converge this with the fisherfolk. 2 other things not much discussed. One is Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, which mandates that every educational institution in the country, right from IIT and IIMs down to a graduate college, each institution has to work with a panchayat in its vicinity. This offers unlimited opportunities of students, local academics interacting with local villagers. And here, fisherfolk could be one well-identified group. Similarly, BharatNet, which would be a fiber optic network reaching every Gram Panchayats. It's almost touched half the Gram Panchayats in India and would be rolled out to the whole country, which again gives huge opportunities for marketing, for knowledge dissemination and things of the kind. Now coming to very specific aspects of support which Gram Panchayats in the current context across the country can give to the poor fisher folk. One, the civic amenities, water supply, road, street lights, playgrounds, and even if you want burial grounds or crematoria. So all this they can provide using the 14th Finance Commission grant, and surely it will be into the 15th Finance Commission also. Then the unlimited possibilities of MG and REGS, fish drying yards, fish storage centers, improving the ponds in the case of inland fisheries. It's up to us to exploit the potential. Then social security. Almost all over the country, panchayats decide the beneficiaries of the National Social Assistance Program for people with disabilities, for widows, for aged people. Here again, it's very easy to get all the eligible fisher folk selected. Then tanks and ponds are again under the control of Gram Panchayats. So leasing out to the poor fishermen could be a priority. Similarly, markets are typically under local governments. So developing fish markets again could be easily done. And more importantly, inclusion through the self-help groups and through the Gram Sabha would be a very important step in empowerment. Now coming to the Kerala situation. Kerala is the most empowered Gram Panchayats or Panchayat Raj or local governments in the country, well endowed with resources, both their own and transferred from the state government. But unfortunately, I must admit openly, the panchayats have not done as well as they could have in terms of fisher folk. Even though Kerala is probably the most developed state in the country and fairly rich now, its fisher folk are as poor as scheduled castes or scheduled tribes. They continue to be outliers. This is quite surprising and in a sense shocking. But there are some lessons to be learned from Kerala. One is a concept of Malsya Sabha. All the adult fisher folk come and participate as a subset of Gram Sabha so that their views can be aired in a very focused manner. Similarly, self-help groups have covered under Kudumbashree the fisher folk, but not very effectively, but they are there, and I think they are giving special importance to reach out to every fisherwoman. And another important innovation of Kerala is the working group, where experts are allowed from outside into the formal system of plan preparation. So experts, NGOs working with fisher folk can participate in the planning process and contribute their ideas for improvement. Some of us have been strongly advocating that you have an informal sub-plan for the fisher folk in Kerala Panchayats. And now at the advocacy phase is on, probably you also would support this idea of developing at least an informal sub-plan where you integrate all the development activities which are meant for the fisher folk. Now, where do we go from here? What I found extremely useful and effective and doable based on my experience in Delhi is what is called a right shop. Now we know the general things and some specifics, but as I told you, it has to be specific for each state. So if you, the FAO, the trust, KILA could get, I'm sure KILA will volunteer, have a right shop where you get 4 or 5 or 6 people from government, from the academia, from civil society, come down to Kerala, go and find out how the panchayats are performing in terms of the people's plan, come back, reflect on what each state can do better than Kerala, adapt Kerala, or just say we can't do it in our state. And then come out with a real action plan for their state, which they can directly give to the secretary and could be an activity of Gram Panchayats. Not all of them can do equally well, but this will give you a great start. Then another great lesson I learned from Delhi, particularly in the context of spreading the self-help groups. It's impossible to reach out to every place immediately. So they came out with the idea of a resource block. So you should come out with the idea of a resource cluster. Maybe 4 or 5 clusters in the country where we invest all our effort, energy, and then develop what is called a proof of concept. And they can emerge a school of practice from which other panchayats and other states can learn. This is the fastest way of reaching out to the whole country. So I'm sure you will look at that possibility. Capacity building is very, very important. Fortunately, we have a National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj. So my advice to you, the trust, KILA, and more importantly, FAO, should get into a dialogue with the National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj and develop generic course modules, which can be contextualized by the State Institute of Rural Development. And my request to the trust, the collective, international collective in support of the fisher workers, is that start a platform of agencies which share your views in helping fisherfolk. I know there are a lot of them. I know a good number of them in Kerala. There must be such organizations across the country. Bring them together. Let's develop a platform for advocacy and to provide technical support. Now new vistas are emerging. Climate change. Local action for climate change is now very popular among academicians, policymakers. But how do you really translate it into practice? This could be good experiments in fisherfolk. Then another important thing is what we call localizing SDGs. The UN agencies in India strongly support this concept. But here again, we have not actually done something at the local level. So this could be an intervention point, small-scale fisheries, as one of the items for localizing SDGs. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. I wish you all the best. Once again, a reminder, this is a beginning and we need to work out an action plan. Thank you.